Indeed, probably good afternoon or good evening from wherever everyone is joining us today to this particular workshop that we're having, looking at, or entitled Bridging the Gaps, AI and Ethics in Combating NCII Abuse. And NCII abuse is around non-consensual intimate image abuse, which is the subject that we're going to be exploring over the course of this panel. I'm David Wright. I'm CEO of a UK charity, SWGFL, and a director of the UK Safe Internet Centre. We will explore, a couple of my colleagues are here, will explain some of the more aspects of some of the things that we do, particularly the Revenge Porn Helpline and also stopncii.org. So we will clearly cover some of those gaps. I'm joined in terms of this panel conversation by a number of very esteemed guests and panelists. I'm going to introduce those to you just to start with. And so we've got a series of questions that we'll be asking. And so each of the panelists, and I just first of all introduce Nagat Dad. In the middle. So Nagat is a founder of the Digital Rights Foundation and also a member of the Meta Oversight Board, as well as the part of the UN Secretary General's AI High-Level Advisory Board. If I next turn to Karuna, who's joining us online. So Karuna is an online safety expert with 2 decades of experience in the intersection of online safety, policy, government affairs, and communications. She consults with tech companies and non-profits on their strategy, policies, and technology to make the internet safer. Karuna previously served as a director, global safety policy at Facebook Meta, where she spent nearly a decade working on issues of child online safety and well-being, women's safety, and suicide prevention. At Meta, she partnered with SWGFL to launch stopncii.org to help victims of non-consensual intimate image abuse. Prior to Facebook, Karuna worked at the US Embassy in India, Ernst & Young, India's first 24/7 news channel, New Delhi Television, and German broadcaster. Karuna is a graduate of St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi, and has completed her postgraduate studies from Albert Ludwigs University. So welcome to Karuna. Also joined by Dipali, sitting next to me. So Dipali is Global Director of Safety Policy at Meta and has been with Meta for over a decade. She leads a team of regional safety policy experts and works on policies, tools, partnerships, and regulation across core safety issues. Also joined by one of my colleagues, Sophie Mortimer, online. From the UK, where it's rather early. Thank you, Sophie. Sophie is manager of the Revenge Porn Helpline and also the Report Harmful Content service at SWGFL. She coordinates a team of practitioners to support adults in the UK who have been affected by the sharing of intimate images without consent and other forms of online abuse and harms. As part of the stopncii.org team, she works with NGOs around the world to support their understanding of Stop NCI and the help it can give victims and survivors in their communities. The NGO network shares learning and best practice to ensure that Stop NCI evolves as a proactive tool that works for everyone wherever they are. And finally, if I turn on to my far right, is my colleague Boris. Boris Radanovic is an expert in the field of online safety and currently serves as the head of engagements and partnerships at SWGFL, a UK-based charity which we've already talked about. He works as the UK Safe Internet Centre, which is part of the European InSafe network, in educating and raising awareness about online safety for children, parents, teachers, and other stakeholders across the world. Boris has worked extensively with various European countries, including Croatia, where he worked at the Safe Internet Centre there, and has been involved in numerous missions to countries like Belarus, Serbia, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and present online safety strategies to government officials and NGOs. His focus is on protecting children from online threats such as cyberbullying, child sexual exploitation and scams, as well as empowering professionals through workshops and keynote speeches. One of the key contributions today includes leading online safety education efforts, where he emphasizes the evolving risks in the digital world, such as grooming and intimate image abuse. Involvement with initiatives like StopNCI.org reflects his commitment to helping prevent non-consensual sharing of intimate images. Introductions complete. So what we've got, I'm just going to invite all the panelists just to give us a couple of minutes introduction, and then we've got a series of structured questions that will open to each of the panelists, and then to everyone in the room here, and also to those of you online as well. So we will be having a really in-depth conversation about this, and based on some of the conclusions from what you now can understand is a very esteemed panel in this particular subject. So if I can just, Nigat, if I can throw it over to you, just a 2-minute introduction into this. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. No, thank you so much, David, for organizing this panel. It's a pity that we are doing this on the last day. It should have been on the first day, because many of us have been working on the issue of non-consensual intimate imagery and videos for the last several years, and not only working on the issue and addressing it, but also looking into solutions. And of course, the helpline, Revenge Porn Helpline in the UK, and at Digital Rights Foundation in Pakistan, we also started a helpline, cyber harassment helpline, and we collaborate together on this as well. In 2016, we started this, and the main idea was basically to address online harms that young women and girls face in country like Pakistan. And there are so many cultural, contextual nuances that many a times platforms are unable to capture that. And that was the main reason that why we started the helpline, not only to address these complaints by young women and girls in the country, but also to give a clear picture to the platforms that how they can actually look into their products, or mechanisms, reporting mechanisms, or remedies that they are providing to different users around the world. I think I'll just say one thing and stop there. That over the years, we have seen that online harms or violence against women or tech facilitated gender-based violence. Now we have so many names of this, but non-consensual intimate imagery around the world has very different consequences in different jurisdictions. In many parts of the world, it kind of limits itself to the online spaces, but in some jurisdictions it turns into offline harm against especially marginalized groups like young women and girls. And in last couple of years, I think the very concerning thing is how AI tools are easily accessible to bad actors, where they are making deep fakes and synthetic histories of women, not only normal users, but also women in the public spaces. And verifying those deep fakes, I think, is a challenge, not only people who have been working on this issue, but for the law enforcement. And then you just look at the larger public who absolutely have no idea how to verify this, and they just believe what they see online. And I think this is the challenge that we all are facing at the moment. I'll stop here.
Nigat, thank you very much. Yes, a subject we will get into without any doubt. I'm next going to just throw it to Karuna, who's joining us online. Karuna, for just a couple of introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, and hi, Nighat, Dipali, Boris, and Sophie. It's so great to be on this panel. David, I do want to give a shout out to you for organizing the discussion on this topic, because I don't think we've done enough work or had enough dialogue as to how the power of artificial intelligence can be used to actually prevent some of this distribution of intimate imagery, or to deter perpetrators, to stop them in their tracks, and even educate, but also to prevent this kind of harm being perpetrated online. And lastly, from also to support victims. We've heard time and time again as to how absolutely debilitating it can be to be in that moment where you are worried that your intimate images are going to be shared online, or they have actually been shared online and you've just come to know. And there is so much that we can do with artificial intelligence to support people in that moment, to give them resources, to let them know what tools they have in their hands, because it can be paralyzing to know that something like this is happening to you. So kudos to you for organizing this very, very important discussion. And I'm looking forward to hearing what comes out of this workshop, and the kind of the ideas that are generated as to how not just tech platforms, but nonprofits such as Southwest Grid for Learning and Nigad's Digital Rights Foundation can actually leverage the power of artificial intelligence to support victims and to deter this harm from being perpetrated online.
Karuna, thank you very much. You're very kind. But yeah, as you say, let's try to harness some of the power about this rather than necessarily some of the challenges that we always see as well. So thank you very much. Next, I'm going to turn to Dipali, if they can introduce. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and thank you, Karuna. I think that was really articulately put as usual. So I work on the safety policy team at Meta. An approach to safety over the years has been multi-pronged. So we think about a couple of things when we're thinking about safety. We think about, do we have the right policies in place on what is okay and not okay to share on the platform? We have our tools and features to give users choice and control over what they're seeing and to customize their experience. And the third, most importantly, is that we have partnerships where we work with experts over the years to be able to address some of the work that we've been seeing. I just want to step back a little bit and talk about how currently StopNCII.org came to being when Meta heard loud and clear from a lot of our experts, a lot of our users, that NCII is a huge issue. And Karuna was actually one of the one of the people who was working on this, and we were able to actually move beyond just being able to address this issue at a company level on our platforms and address it at a cross-industry level. So I think there is really a genuine place for industry and civil society to come together to address some of these harms in a very scalable way, something as important as non-consensual intimate imagery. And we've also to come together and try and understand, as Karuna put it, what is the ways that we can use this technology to actually help victims or provide education or provide resources. So we do that currently on our platforms. So for example, if you look at something like NCII, or let me give you an example of suicide and self-injury, we're able to use proactive technology to identify people who have posted content which can contain suicidal content or content referring to eating disorders, and we're able to catch that content and able to send them resources as well as connect them with local helplines. That is such an important way that we can use technology to make sure that people who need the help are able to get it. And sometimes there are not quick solutions, but it takes time to have discussions work together, and it's a combination of technology and the advice of experts who are actually working on this issue to come up with solutions, both to prevent that harm, to address that harm, and to provide resources and support to victims. Sorry, David, I know I took the long way to this, but I just wanted to provide some context.
Dipali, thank you very much. Next, I'm going to throw it, Sophie, to you in terms of 2-minute introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. Having worked supporting survivors of intimate image abuse for over 8 years, I do think that we need to approach the use of AI in providing support with caution. We know that there are advantages to be gained by the use of AI technologies in reporting harmful content at scale and with speed. However, it's also important to remember that victims and survivors can be abused with these tools and may not want to engage with them while seeking support because trust is understandably degraded. We have previously worked at Southwest Grid for Learning on developing an AI support tool, and ultimately we decided that the risks were not outweighed by the benefits, certainly not at this time. we simply couldn't be sure that the technology could safeguard people in their time of need adequately enough. I really hope this will change, because I think there is huge potential here and that we can revisit these concepts. But it's just really imperative that we have trust in the security of such a tool and that it prioritizes the safety and well-being of users.
Thank you, Sophie. And finally, Boris.
Thank you, David, and thank you very much for organizing this, and good morning, everybody. I think at least a good pertinent note to note, it is morning, and if I'm going to call on anything in my introduction, is that we all, and especially the policy and the governance sector, need to wake up to the benefits and potential threats of AI. If we know anything in the last couple of decades, online safety and protection of children and adults, is that modalities of harm are changing rather rapidly. And speaking about the application of AI or the benefits of AI, we are missing, and I'm really glad that this is on the last day of IGF. So I hope this conversation will continue. But we are missing governance and structure and frameworks coming from and being supported by, yes, the industry, yes, the NGOs, yes, the researchers, but as well nation states across the world. And if I can jump off a point from Karuna, absolutely we need a broader conversation on this, of understanding, yes, the potential threats to it, but as well emphasizing the benefits and how it can be utilized to better protect and better align with some of our policies. And I would agree with my dear colleague Sophie from the Revenge Porn Helpline that currently the threats do outweigh the benefits, and we need to make sure that advocating for the proper use of tools such as stopncii.org and other inventive ways of solving already known problems by AI, with AI, or at least with the support of AI, is going to be imperative going forward. And only thing that I can say, the possible support coming out of the technology capabilities of AI is tremendous, and we need to rein that in and understand it much better than we do now.
Okay, Boris and everyone, thank you ever so much. And we're also joined from a moderation perspective. Colleague Niels is also managing the online aspects of this. So those of you joining us online, if you're asking any questions, Niels, you will need a microphone though to articulate some of those at some stage. Excellent, we've got one. Okay, so by way of diving into this particular issue that you've heard some brief introduction in terms of specific questions as we get it down into the aspects about AI, but particularly in context of non-consensual intimate image abuse. I'm first going to turn to Nighat. So you've already heard, so Nighat is Exec Director at the Digital Rights Foundation and also member of the Meta Oversight Board. So Nighat, the question to pose to you, so your advocacy for digital rights, particularly in regions with differing privacy laws, places you at the forefront of this debate. How should AI systems for NCII detection be adapted ethically to fit varying cultural and legal contexts?
Yeah, I think Sophie and Boris touched a little bit on that yes, they are like we can use AI systems to our benefit as well, and harness them in terms of giving speedy remedies to the victims and survivors of tech facilitated gender-based violence. But at the same time, I think in our context, we have to be extra careful and cautious. AI systems need to solve for cultural nuance, and we know that current models are trained on English and other Western contexts and languages. But I'm also hopeful and optimistic that while we are having these conversations, these conversations will lead to new generation of AI that will better understand cultural and linguistic nuance. And I understand that sitting at the UN Secretary General's AI high-level advisory body, we have had those conversations in last 1 year, where we brought global majority perspective from different angles, not just that the conversations around AI are only only happening in the global north, by some global north countries, and global majority countries are not really part of those conversations. And until or unless you are not part of the conversation, you actually don't know how to address different issues while using AI technologies, or being aware of the threats and risks of these technologies. I think these conversations are happening at different spaces. I'm glad that we are also talking about this as different helplines and those who are addressing NCII. But I think it's also important that we cannot we understand that we can't solely rely on AI to combat NCII. Platforms, social media platforms, still need to commit to human moderators and human review, and they need to create easy pathways for users to escalate this content when automation misses it. So that's three things that comes to my mind: broader training for AI, continued human oversight, and user-friendly reporting mechanisms. I'd also like to see transparency and constant auditing of AI, so we can see how well these automated content moderation systems are performing. And transparency should be granted to civil society, so that there are opportunities for third-party reviews of how these models perform. And I'll just like to plug our a white paper that we released from Oversight Board, which is around content moderation in the era of AI. And it sort of draws our own experiences for the last 4 years while delve into cases that we have decided, and looking into so many cases related to gender and tech-facilitated gender-based violence that users have faced on Meta platforms. And we looked into the tools, we looked into the community guidelines and policies of Meta and gave them really good recommendations. But also, this white paper is not just for Meta platforms, this is for all platforms who are actually using AI to combat harassment on their platforms. And there are so many recommendations that we have given. And one of them is basically constant auditing of their AI tools on their platforms that they are using, but also giving access to third parties like researchers in terms of like what kind of feedback that they can give to the Meta. And I think Meta has a leverage because they have a very good initiative as a trusted partners initiative, and they can leverage that sort of ecosystem in terms of getting feedback and also providing them support who are already addressing tech-facilitated gender-based violence.
Nigat, thank you very much. Some great, really great points there, and I'm really struck too by, that the point about the westernized data and extensive in terms of training models is a really good point. And also want to recognise the global leadership that you provide in this space and have done for so many years. So it's great to have you here, and what an opportunity for everybody to ask questions too. So Nigat, thank you very much. Okay, just as I sort myself out, next I'm going to turn Karuna to you in terms of question. And so now, as both a trustee of ours, very important trustee of ours, thank you very much, and obviously a key advocate as well for Stop NCII, having been the one with the original either idea and certainly what the heavy responsibility we feel for Stop NCII in having yours being largely created it. So your question, as a driving force behind stopncii.org, what role do you see AI playing in scaling global NCII protection efforts? What ethical principles are essential to ensuring AI tools support victims without compromising user autonomy? Karuna.
Thank you, David. And, both, I think there are two questions. Yours is a two-part question, and both really, really important, questions. The one thing that, just following up from, what Nigat was saying, I think there's not been enough transparency from the tech industry, unfortunately, as to how they're currently leveraging the power of AI in this space. We've heard a lot of how they're using AI to get ahead of, for example, child sexual abuse materials or anything related to child abuse on their platforms, but they're not sharing enough of how they are using AI to get ahead of some of the harmful non-consensual sharing of intimate images on their platform. And credit to Meta, Dipali, Meta has been one of the few companies that's really talked about how they were able to leverage the power of AI in one way. And I'm not sure, Dipali, if you're going to touch on this later, and forgive me if I'm like stealing your thunder here, but the work that, the use of AI, especially in closed secret groups where victims may not be aware that their intimate images are being shared. So using AI in those spaces to be able to proactively identify if a image or a video is potentially non-consensually shared, and to bump it up to reviewers for making, reviewing the content and taking it down if it is NCII. I think that's a really great example of how this technology can be used to get ahead of the harm, because many times we've heard from victims that the onus and the burden on them for reporting, for trying to check if this content has been shared online is excruciatingly painful. So I think, I talked about this in my earlier opening statement as well. There are 3 ways particularly, I think tech companies could be leveraging the power of AI to get ahead of this harm. Prevention. So if there are signals which they have on their platforms, if someone is, for example, updated their relationship status to say that they've recently been through a breakup, or expressed any kind of, trauma or hurt, which could potentially mean that they have intimate images, which they might want to get, send through stopncii.org, for example, to nip the harm in its bud. Or if deterrence, if someone is trying to upload NCII, if the signals are all there, could the platform then bump up a education card to tell them that this is actually harmful, it's illegal in many countries, or again, to really stop that abuse in its tracks and not allow that content to be shared in the first place. And third is, of course, supporting victims. Again, things like if someone is searching for NCII related resources on a search engine or on a platform, then could you bump up something like stopncii.org to them at that point to tell them these kind of services or these kind of support options exist, helplines exist around the world. Many victims don't know, and this is the first time that they're ever hearing of this abuse when they're experiencing it. But both, all 3 actually, Sophie, Nighat, and Boris, all really raised very important points about thinking through some of the risks and some of the loopholes with deploying AI without being very thoughtful about it. So a few things that I'd love to list down, just, things that we learned when we were building stopncii.org or working with Sophie and other helplines around the world on what is it that organizations really need to keep in mind when they're building out these technologies to support victims. One, keeping victims at the center of the design, making sure that you're not speaking on behalf of them, you're giving them agency, you're empowering them, but not taking any decisions on behalf of them. 2, no, shaming or victim blaming. They're under enough pressure, enough stress. This is not their, mistake that, intimate images are being shared. This is on the perpetrator. That's, trust is not a bad thing, over here. It's the perpetrator who's broken the trust, and they need to feel ashamed, not the person who's in those intimate images. Nighat talked about bias, and just, making sure that any technology that is developed is not taking into is taking into account other instances where, this content, it may not be NCII. I'm not sure that AI, is at that stage right now where it needs more training, it needs more support to be able to make sure that it's 100% accurately identifying content as NCII, and recognizing those biases is really important part of it. Also, accountability and transparency. If tech companies are using these technologies, I'm hoping that they are, or if organizations, nonprofits are thinking about how they can use AI in this space, being transparent, being accountable, ways for people to report. Nighat talked about how important reporting still is, even in these scenarios. Giving people the ability to reach out to the service or the platform is really important. And of course, I will always keep harping on prevention. If there are ways that this technology can be used to prevent the harm in its first place, to deter the harm, I think a lot more work should be done over there, because once the harm has happened, it's already quite late. So the more work that can be done in that space would be really great. I'll stop there. A lot of things that I've thrown out.
Karuna, thank you very much. Can I also, perhaps we've made an assumption and not really introduced stopncii.org. Karuna, can I ask you to do that? Just to explain briefly to everybody what stopncii.org is and how it works.
Yes, absolutely. And Sophie, please, jump in if I'm missing anything. I know it's your baby and I'm just, talking about it. But stopnci.org, the whole goal behind stopnci.org is to support people to really stop the abuse in its tracks. The way stopnci.org works is that if you think you have, if you have intimate images which you are worried which will be used without your consent on any one of the participating platforms, you can use this platform to create hashes or digital fingerprints of those photos and videos and share those hashes with the participating platforms, so that if anyone tries to upload that photo or that video on those participating platforms, they can get an early signal that this content may violate their policies. They can send it to their reviewers or use their technology to determine whether this violates their policies or not, and stop that content from being shared on their services. So it's really, it's very much a prevention tool. If content is being shared on platforms already, we encourage people to actually report on that platform to get fastest action. But if you're worried that it's going to be shared on any one of the participating platforms, in addition to that, you can use stopnci.org to stop that abuse in its tracks. Sophie, I don't know if I missed anything and if you want to add anything onto that.
Beautifully done. I would just highlight the fact that these digital hashes are created on somebody's own device. They don't have to send that image to anyone. And I think that's enormously empowering and a huge step forward in the use of technology that puts victims and survivors right at the heart of these evolutions.
Actually, one more thing, if I can just add, sorry, David and Sophie, is about the privacy preserving way in which stopnci.org has been built. In addition to not taking those photos and videos, just taking the hashes from the victims, very minimal data is asked of the victims, because we know that this is such a harrowing experience. We don't want to, stop them from using the service in any way. And I think that's also very important as we're talking about ethics around building of any of this AI technology, making sure whatever data is collected, it's minimal, it's proportionate to what is needed to run these services, but not using that data for anything than what you're collecting it for, and you're telling people that you're collecting the data for, and also not using the data without their consent for anything. I think it's really, really important. Privacy and data should be at the center of the design of any AI technology that's built in this space.
Thank you both. Amazing kind of explanation from the two people leading this. Thank you. Next, we're going to come to Dipali, who we've already heard. So is Director of Global Safety and Policy at Meta. So Dipali, with your expertise on safety, can you talk about how Meta is thinking about responsible development of AI? Can you give some examples of how Meta is thinking about safety and AI and the challenges ahead, clearly in context of NCII?
Thanks, David. I think Karna's done such a good job of it, but I'm going to try and add some additional context. The first thing that I want to say is just to step back and talk a little bit about how Meta is currently using AI. So I've been with Meta, like I said, for about a decade. When I joined, and in fact, when Karuna joined as well, when we talked about safety and when we talked about our community standards, and community standards essentially are rules which we say clearly what is okay and not okay to post on our platforms, including NCII, including hate speech, including CSAM. We used to really encourage user reporting because we didn't really have proactive technology built out at that time. So we were dependent on the signal that we were getting from users to be able to understand why that content is violating, and rely more on human review and have that content reviewed by human reviewers to be able to take the appropriate action. Over the years, we've invested in really developing proactive technology to be able to catch a majority of this content even before it's reported to us. So we know that a lot of people will see content and just not report it, or they may feel that they may feel like their peers will judge them for reporting it. So proactive technology really helps to identify that content and remove it, and also it doesn't remove the need for human reviewers, but it makes their job easier, and we're able to do this better at scale. So today, for example, we publish in our community standards. We're able to remove a majority of the content that violates our community standards before it is even reported to us. And we're also trying to work on understanding how our large language models can essentially help us do this better. And two ways where we think that there's going to be an impact is going to be, one is speed and the other is accuracy. Will it be able to help us identify this content even faster? And if we're able to identify this content faster, what is the accuracy with which that the it can we can take action in an automated way, which also lessens the time that human reviewers need to spend on really the important cases, versus the cases where there's clearly very high confidence that it is violating, and therefore it can be it can be taken down quickly. So I mean, to answer the issue in a shorter version, I think that there is a lot more scope for this technology, but there continues to be the importance of a combination of using automated technology as well as human review. So we are taking the right actions, and we're taking the appropriate actions. As we move to responsible AI, David, Meta has an open source approach to our large language models. As you know, we've open sourced our large language models, and therefore it's been really important that before we do this, that we have a very thoughtful and responsible way on how we're thinking of developing AI within this company. And I'm going to talk about a couple of pillars that we have, that we that we consider when we are talking about Gen AI. Actually, I'm not going to go through all the pillars because that's going to take a lot more time. I'll go through a couple of them. The first is obviously robustness and safety. It's really important that we do two things before we're releasing our large language models. The first is stress testing the models. So we have teams internally and externally who stress test those models. And stress testing, or what we call red teaming, is essentially making sure that experts are stress testing the models for finding vulnerabilities, and then we then are able to identify those vulnerabilities. So to give you an example, we have specialist teams at Meta who are stress testing or red teaming the large language models. We also open it up to the larger public to be able to stress test. So for example, in Las Vegas, there's a conference called the DEF CON conference, and our large language models were tested. Over 2,500 hackers actually stress tested those models and identified vulnerabilities, which we then use to inform the development of our models. The second thing is fine-tuning the models. Fine-tuning the models essentially is fine-tuning the models so that they're able to give more specific responses, and especially that they are in some cases fine-tuned to deliver expert backed resources. So to give you an example of this, currently what happens on Facebook and Instagram is, if somebody posts content where they are feeling suicidal, or for example there are mental health issues, and either somebody reports it or we are able to proactively find that content, we are able to send expert backed resources to the person, which is essentially connecting to helplines. So if you're sitting in the UK, you'll get connected to a UK helpline. If you're sitting in India, you'll get connected to an India helpline. This is because I think fundamentally we believe that we are not the experts on safety in terms of providing this kind of informed support. And to the point that Sophie made, we don't want our technologies to be able to actually be providing that support. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we are making available the right tools by which that whether young people or vulnerable people or targeted people can use the right resources. So coming back to fine-tuning our AI models, the AI models will be fine-tuned to through expert resources. So if somebody talks about suicide or self-injury, the response should not be that it's going to provide you guidance. The response that it'll throw up is, here are a list of expert organizations that you can contact in your particular organization. And I know I'm repeating myself, but this is a really important way in which we can use these technologies to provide a level of support that we have been able to provide on other platforms like Facebook and Instagram. The third thing that I want to talk about, essentially, when we're talking about safety and robustness, is a lot of a lot of people don't really understand AI or AI tools and AI features. So we're also working with experts generally to try and ensure that they're understanding what Gen AI is. So for example, we work with experts to have resources where parents have tips on how to talk to young people about about Gen AI, etc. So these are just a couple of things that, at a high level overview, we think about when we're thinking about building AI responsibly. I want to quickly cover the other pillars. I won't talk too much about it, but the other pillars that we're thinking about, because it's about safety and robustness, but it's also about making sure that there's privacy, so that we have a robust privacy review to make sure that there is transparency and control. As everybody on the panel said, it's really important to be transparent about what you're doing with your Gen AI tools and products. And we're also working cross-industry to be able to develop standards to identify provenance, to make sure that users understand whether their content is generated by AI or is not generated by AI. And the other pillar really is, good governance, as we talked about, transparency, transparency, good governance, as well as, and I know Nick had mentioned this, but fairness is really important. Fairness to ensure that there is, there is diversity, as well as that it's inclusive in terms of these technologies, because we all know that access to these technologies is still an issue. So I mean, that is overall our approach to responsible AI. Let me give you one example. I know I've talked about robustness and safety, but in terms of fairness and inclusivity, we actually have a actually have a large language model where we are able to translate English into over 200 languages, and there are some of the lesser known languages. And I say this because, in the trust and safety space, a lot of the material that we develop and a lot of the experts that exist are in English language. And this is another example of, not particular to NCII, but overall in the trust and safety space, that we can we can actually use a lot of these products and tools that have been developed to further enhance safety and make sure that this messaging is available in the languages that people really understand, and not just English or Western languages. Wikipedia, for example, is using using this to translate is using this to translate a lot of their content into these languages. So I think that there is two things. There is a lot more work to be done, but I think that there is a great room for collaboration in terms of both how we prevent this, how we address it, but how do we even collaborate better in being able to support some of the people who are dealing with these issues in actually a better way than we've currently been able to do so. The last thing that I would say is that I know that there's sometimes we get asked this a lot. We have a community standards which make it very clear what kind of content is not allowed on the platform, irrespective of if it's organic content or it's been developed by Gen AI. If it violates our policies, we will remove that content. And we've updated our community standards to make that very clear as well.
Dipali, thank you very much. It's great as well to hear that. Also the use of and creation of some of the tools too, to particularly I'm interested in the translation to different languages, which we probably all know is a real challenge. And I know from Stop NCII perspective, we do struggle with that, trying to make it as accessible and the support as accessible as we possibly can. So thank you, Dipali, for that, and also for Meta's help and Meta's support with Stop NCII too. Next, Sophie, I'm going to come to you. And so, as we've already heard, your work with the Revenge Porn Helpline, I clearly know that particularly well. The question that we want to pose is about what ethical dilemmas have you observed with technology to address NCII abuse, particularly regarding privacy and consent. How do you think AI systems should be designed to respect these sensitive boundaries? Sophie?
Thank you, David. I think it's a crucial question because there's no doubt that the development of this technology is moving at pace. And I think we could all get quite carried away with what we can achieve with these technologies, but it's so important that we put the victim and survivor experience at the center of them. I could probably talk for quite a while on this, but I'll try and keep it a bit tighter. But I think crucially, the supporting the privacy of victims who in a moment of absolute crisis is really, really key. So we can use AI tools to help identify and remove non-consensual content, but that requires access to people's very sensitive images and data, and that can be a huge concern to individuals who might fear the access of technology, because it's technology that has participated in their abuse. They can fear data breaches or a lack of transparency in how their information is being stored and processed. So there's a real dilemma there in balancing that need for intervention with the protection of victims and the preservation of their privacy and stopping future harm. We can use AI technologies to track the use of someone's images, and this could be enormous. And I think Dipali referenced this in terms of the use of technology to handle the scale at which and the speed at which this content can move across platforms. But that just brings more complexity. So the methods for tracking content can concern victims around surveillance, or that there's a risk of creating systems that monitor individuals more broadly than was intended. How will those images and that data be used in a way that won't impact on people's privacy and autonomy? Then the use of people's data, always very, very concerning. It's very sensitive personal information used to address this harm. There can be a lack of transparency from many platforms about how these systems are used. How are the models trained? Again, the large language models that are used, and this has been referenced already, I think by Nagat earlier, that we know that they don't always respond as well, perhaps, to people of different cultural, religious, or ethnicities, and that's really, really challenging for the risk of presenting false positives and false negatives. Also, one area that's often referenced is around synthetic sexual content, which is often referred to as deepfake. And I think there's a tendency to say, well, we can identify that as fake so that the harm is less. But I think the evidence of some victim and survivor voices is that just isn't the case. And I think just labeling something as fake can undermine the experience of individuals, because there is a real loss of bodily autonomy and self-worth, and it can cause really significant emotional distress. And if we only focus on the falseness of an image, an AI system might overlook the broader psychological and social impacts on individuals. Certainly, AI can help with evidence collection and privacy. There's a real role there in terms of watermarking or embedding metadata that helps track the origin. But then there's more ethical questions there around consent and the privacy of people's data. And do people understand? I think, again, it's already been referenced that people's access to technology and understanding of how these technologies works around the world. And we can't assume consent, and it's just really important that consent that is given is really informed. And I think we've got a lot of work to do there to ensure that we have that, but it is absolutely crucial. I also think sometimes that the technology moves fast, but perpetrators of abuse move fast as well. And for all the safeguards we put in, we have to be aware that perpetrators are working hard to circumvent them. So we need to be really flexible in our thinking. And I think the priority for me is keeping that human element. Humans understand humans and can hopefully foresee some of these issues and combat ways, but also to put humanity at the heart of our response to individuals who are humans themselves, to state the obvious, but don't want to be supported entirely by technology. They want access to humans and that human understanding.
Sophie, thank you very much. Perhaps it is a point as well here, just to talk the term victims being used, and I know we've had this conversation, because I think there's often has been criticism that we shouldn't be using this in terms of terminology. We shouldn't be using the word victim, and that should be really survivor, and I think. I'll perhaps, if I may put words in your mouth, given the conversations that we've had, is that no, particularly from a revenge porn helpline perspective, no, we very much do support victims. Our job is to make them a survivor. Now, clearly, anybody's entitled to have a reference, however they see fit. But certainly, I think we're making the point here is that whilst our job is to make victims into survivors of particular tragic circumstances, we're not always successful, which just goes to highlight in many cases, the catastrophic impact that this abuse has on individuals' lives. I don't know, Sophie, is there anything you want to add there?
No, I think you're right, David. We tend to take quite a neutral position when speaking to people, because it's not our place as a helpline to identify somebody as victim, survivor, or anything else. So in practice, we reflect back to people what they say. But I completely agree that the majority of people coming to us are very much would identify themselves as victims, because we are usually there for them quite early in that journey, and it is absolutely our aim to make them a survivor, and in the hope that they can leave all of those labels behind and put this totally behind them.
Thank you, Sophie. Nigaz?
No, I think this is very interesting, because in our helpline, we also, when we address folks who reach out to us, we are very careful what do we call them, and we sort of leave it to them. What do they want to want themselves to call? Many a times when we call them survivors, and this is like our priority, like we call them survivors and not victims, because they are reaching out and they're fighting the system, and they're like, but I haven't received any remedy, so I'm still a victim. So this is a very interesting conversation, and I think it should entirely be on the person who is facing all of this to call whatever they want to call themselves, either victims or survivors. Our priority is to call them survivors. That many a times people are like, I'm not that resilient. Don't call me survivor. I don't have that much energy left to fight back platforms or the legal system that they are dealing with.
Yeah, Sophie, I don't know if you want to react to that, and I'm thinking too around often when we're approached by the media, that they want to speak to somebody who we've supported, being careful not to add a name, which we have a policy of specifically not because of the acute vulnerabilities that that individuals have. Sophie?
I completely agree with Nagat. It's not our place to apply that label, and certainly the majority of people who come to us would describe themselves as a victim. In fact, I'm not sure I can recall anyone who self-identified without any prompting as a survivor, because that is not how people are feeling in that moment and in that space. And the harm, it feels so out of people's control, because what has happened is on platforms, and we all know that images now can move quite fast, and the fear, that loss of control is the overwhelming feeling that people have when they come to services like ours, and that doesn't make anyone feel like a survivor, unfortunately, at that time. And that's why we use neutral language in that first instance, and reflect back what somebody will say to them, because that's how they're feeling. But I hope that we provide that reassurance that when they hang up the phone, they will be feeling better than they did when they picked it up.
Thank you, Sophie. And also for all that hard work that goes in the background as well, which I know acutely to the extent of that. Okay, finally, I'm going to turn to Boris, and I say finally too because that's after Boris has given us a contribution. This is when we open the floor for your questions, either in reaction to anything that you've particularly heard, or indeed if there's any other aspects that we perhaps haven't covered, both within the room and also online as well. So, Boris, if I just turn to you, and as Boris has said, he's head of partnerships and engagement at SWGFL. So, given your extensive work in online safety, particularly at SWGFL, how do you see AI evolving as a tool to support NCII detection and intervention? What are the ethical frameworks do you believe are necessary to avoid potential harm to users while ensuring victim or survivor, or whichever terminology we deem fit, to support them? Boris.
Thank you for that very much. I just want to say I'm really honored and proud to sit amongst heroes, definitely in the space, and thank you so much for the invitation. Thinking about AI, a quote came to my mind, and please agree or disagree with me. Specifically talking about AI, I think we know little about everything and a lot about nothing. While we fully understand the complexity of the space, whether that's the technology behind AI or the stakeholders implementing AI, I don't think we fully understand nor utilize the true power or the possible true power of AI. And there is much more we could be doing. And I know in a 2-minute contribution, trying to unpack it might be a bit difficult, but I do hope these conversations and this session reaches stakeholders from policy and government, but as well stakeholders from the industry sector. And I loved the notion of stress testing and using hackers and all of that. But I would also advocate for, as we just had a conversation about users and victims and children and a lot of people that we don't maybe fully grasp, to be those first movers to test out or stress test those AI models, so we can see maybe a different way of thinking. But talking about that, I think we need to go back to foundations, and the foundation is that the current models may or may not, and in some cases they do consist of their data sets having child sexual abuse material in it, non-consensual intimate imagery in it, and many other that we probably don't know, illegal or harmful material. So if any, and I hope a lot of stakeholders are listening, let's first clean out the fundamentals of the tools that we are supposed to be using. And number one, yes, you can use stopncii.org hashes that we can help you clear out already known instances of non-consensual intimate image abuse, but we must go further. And as we spoke, and as I listened to really admirable contributions from every speaker here, I hope somebody's listening to me and in a year's time will prove me right, that we are missing a global power force in AI development to focus on safeguarding, to focus on the guardrails, to be the solution for all of these companies that are having the same issues and problems. If there's anybody who's willing to work on that, SWGFL he is here and definitely willing to support. But let me come back to the question about detection and intervention. I think that's an important two-piece of a much larger picture. Yes, we can talk about detection of behaviors, and again, from a perpetrator point of view, but as well from a user's point of view that might put them at risk without knowing it. And we need to utilize AI tools en masse to help us mitigate some of those issues. But as well, we need to talk about how do we then engage with those perpetrators after we detected it, and how do we guide those people to the right course of actions, or what are the consequences of their repeated, and sometimes we know that those are happening on platforms, repeated offenses, or people or individuals taking part in something called a collector's culture, where they're intentionally collecting thousands and hundreds of images of rather various individuals. And we know they exist on many platforms. And the question is, okay, now that we use AI to detect this, what are we going to do next, and how are we going to act on that when we're talking about intervention. I think as well, Sophie and the Revenge Porn Helpline are already using a rather innovative way, I would say, of utilizing AI tools to help us mitigate the number of reports using a chatbot function that allows us to communicate and support much bigger and larger number of people than we would be able to do with just human support. So again, when we talk about intervention, how about user-specific, mental and health-based, legal-based support that those users can gain when or if they encounter that harm online? But as well, I think the question was about frameworks, and I think we are missing a lot, as I said in my introductions, governments, frameworks, structures on the use, but as well research that stands behind it. And ethical frameworks needs to be user-focused and user-centric, victim-informed or survivor-informed, most definitely, but then balancing the threat of having access to the most sensitive pieces of data that you have, and that is the data of your own or others' abuse, and how does it unfold and to whom and where, but at the same time, extremely sensitive data sets that we might learn from and research and maybe mitigate some of those risks in the future. So I'm not trying to say this is a easy thing to do, but I'm saying that we should start combating it now before we are ending up in a much, I would say, more difficult space to untangle. So if I'm looking at it, what do we need to do? I think from a stakeholder or company's perspective, we need more dedication. And I support Meta, and I love our friends from all over the world involved with stopncii.org. But we are at 12 of the biggest platforms in the world engaged with us. We need hundreds. We need thousands of platforms dedicating to this, of advocating for a solution in the space, and then bringing it forward. And definitely more investment to NGOs and researchers across the world battling in this space, because we are at the forefront. And we are non-governmental, small and agile organizations. We are meant to be at the forefront. But as we know, with every arrow, there is a long piece behind it that needs to be supporting us and pushing us forward. And I love the quote and the comment from Karuna about transparency. Absolutely, we need more transparency. And as well, please agree or disagree with me that in now the first movers, the first companies that we see in the AI space, correct me if I'm wrong, but it does seem to me that they're more interested in safeguarding their intellectual property and their finances, but instead protecting and safeguarding their users. And I think that's a big question. If we move with the AI as a part of every part of our daily life, what do we value more? And I think many of us sitting here and many of us listening would advocate for the privacy and protections, but as well safeguarding of our users first and foremost. And then we can build upon those tools. And maybe in the end, I was trying to find a picture that helps me better understand the extreme rapid rise and development of AI. And I remembered, I don't know if you saw the first movies and first pictures of the Wright brothers and the planes when we started inventing them. And then after a couple of meters, the plane crashed. Then they spent months or years developing, then a couple of dozens of meters, then hundreds of meters. So we evolved rather slowly and then more rapidly. The plane, something that brought us all here in this wonderful city of Riyadh. I think with AI, we're slowly moving at light speed pace of development, but we have no idea who's flying and we have no idea how we're going to land. So I fully advocate that we need to fix the foundations and invest more in clearing the data sets, invest in the NGOs around the world battling these issues and trying to find solutions, and help us all understand better and use AI better. So hopefully we can land safely and find a better and more powerful use for AI for the benefit of us all. I think that would be it. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Boris. There's a point to land or to finish on. Forgive me. And if anyone does have any ideas about how NCII is going to land, then would very much like to hear that. Okay, so now we're going to turn it to you. We're going to turn it over to you in terms of any particular questions that anyone has. Niels, have we got any questions?
Not yet online, but I might introduce a personal question then in that case. I have the mic anyway. So.
Off you go.
First of all, thank you all very much for these very valuable contributions. It was a very interesting panel. For those who don't know me, I'm Niels van Pamel from Child Focus, which is the Belgian Safer Internet Center. So I definitely agree with almost everything has been said here. Also with the comment of Sophie that like how deep fakes right now that we are maybe focusing too much into showing that something is a fake, but that doesn't like it doesn't really matter for a victim that is, for example, somebody who's a victim of deep nuding. With fake naked pictures that everybody believes to be real anyway, right? So we've done a study last year on deep nuding and seeing how this, first of all, how the market looks like, what is happening with young people in Belgium right now, and how this is exploding in our faces right now. And we've seen, first of all, that the long-term traumatic impact for a victim is exactly the same as for somebody compared to victims of real NCII, right? So first of all, we need to also debunk some myths. And I also wanted to add to, I think it was Boris, who said that like that we have to take into account how fast things are changing and moving right now. And also with jumping to conclusions. To give an example, in this study, we noticed, it's a study from 2023, that 99% of all the victims of deep nuding are women and girls. But this year, 50% of the cases we opened at Child Focus were also men that were victims. So what we concluded is that in the early days, 2023, most of the victims were girls because the data sets that were used were only working on girls and women. But right now, in a world where sextortion is like perpetrators who want to sextort victims, they are using AI also much more in their behalf to guide themselves, misguide themselves, and this technology apparently now also works into having boys into, how do you say this, like make deep nudes of boys. So if we don't do research, more research, and finding out how these technologies are finding more and more ways into new vulnerable groups, we might look over them. So that was maybe a comment on that. So we need longitudinal follow-up and academic research. So that was my comment here.
Can I just respond to the men being becoming victims of sextortion? At our helpline, when we started keeping in mind that more young women and girls are actually becoming victim and survivor of this kind of crime. But we ended up getting 50% complaints from men. And starting from 2016 up till now, we never said no to them because we started the helpline only for women. But when men reaching out to you from a context and culture where shame is so much associated with anyone, men or woman, and what we noticed that young men had nowhere to turn to. There was other helplines for women for psychological support, and of course the cyber harassment helpline was the unique one, but there were other helplines for women, but none for the man. So we ended up dealing with their complaints. Another thing that we noticed that men, young boys and men were hesitant to go to the law enforcement as well. And again, the culture of shame associated to it, but also I think now this is more related to privacy. They were really scared, like women, to give their evidence to the law enforcement that how they will deal with or how they will protect my data when I'll give it to them as an evidence and they will work on my case. So what they wanted basically was to report to the platform first and the helpline. So their first line of reporting was always the helpline and the platform instead of law enforcement. So I think it kind of touches upon that it's beyond any gender or sex.
Yes.
You know, this impacts everyone, and especially from conservative cultures, you know, women still find some space to talk to each other, but young boys actually they just suffer in silence.
Yes. And then maybe to add to this comment when you said like boys are scared to go to law enforcement with evidence, I guess that's where on-device hatching comes in.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Niels, appreciate the comment. And if I may, I think it proves to the point that both of you, that the modalities of harm are changing so rapidly that even we who our job is to follow them sometimes have a difficulty. And I loved using this, especially describing deepfakes, is that the image may not be real, but the harm is. And we need to understand in a fast evolving AI visual space, we now have more and more AI tools that are being developed that can based on one prompt, design you a couple of minutes of video, that unfortunately use case will extend and unfortunately be far more wide-reaching, where we can have fake or digitally altered imagery and now videos that might seem or might not be real, but the harm that we already now know. So we don't need another research. We don't need more experiences. That we know that the harm perpetrated amongst towards victims and users will be real. So thank you so much for that comment.
Okay, just to carry on that theme, and just before I open the floor, I've got a question here. Sophie, is there any response to that, and particularly as well, knowing the increasing call volume, as well as Nigat said, changes in terms of gender?
Yes, it's interesting to hear what Nigat was saying. We certainly have always had a substantial proportion of cases of male victims affected by sextortion, though that was a proportion that rose significantly at around 2020, and hasn't really fallen away ever since, and now makes up between a quarter and a third of our caseload. And I think it's interesting that talking about the creation of content, synthetic content to use in sextortion, but of course AI is also being used to generate those conversations at scale, and the presentation of the person that the victim survivor thinks that they are talking to, it can also be AI generated, and that of course just ramps up the scale of these forms of abuse and frankly crimes. It was the other thing that struck me was I looked at some cases earlier in the year, and we had what surprised me slightly at the time, a number of cases that came from women from specific cultural or religious communities in the UK who'd had synthetic content created of them that wasn't necessarily within the definitions of intimate content, but presented them in situations that would have been very, very harmful to them in their own communities. And I know it's always the staple that we refer to of a woman without wearing a headscarf, but that was the reality that people are experiencing, and you know that can cause enormous harm. So I think we need to be aware that there are, again, broader definitions of intimacy globally, and we need to be very nuanced in our responses, but also how these technologies can be used to cause other forms of harm as well. So there are huge challenges here.
Not least the tenfold increase in case volume in the last 4 years.
And there's that. Absolutely, David. Case numbers can continue to rise year on year, and yes, certainly in the last 4 or 5 years they have risen exponentially.
Okay, thank you very much.
David, I don't know if you can see me, but I just wanted to follow up on the gender discussion to just check in with both Sophie and Nigat based on what they're seeing on the helpline, because the initial research that I've seen also indicates that usually it's more financially motivated when it's related to men and to boys versus with women there are other motivations which are at play. Is this consistent with what y'all are seeing on your helplines, or what are y'all hearing from people who are calling in?
Yeah, Karuna, I'll quickly respond to that. I think it's kind of changing from men who are public figures, like politically active, human rights defenders, journalists, and their intimate imagery or videos are actually one way of sort of intimidating them into silence, basically. So it's also changing from financial side to the other motives by the bad actors.
Just a short point in terms of the role that companies, and this is not just Meta, but companies like Meta and other social media platforms can play in disseminating a lot of education as well as resources, because I think that that's really important as well. And I know a lot of people mention sextortion, so we've recently run a sextortion PSA in a number of countries where we worked with experts to be able to develop the exact messaging that is really important for young people and young women and young men to hear. And I think that that's something that is that's something where more of us can collaborate, because I think that everybody's doing things in isolation, but I think that there is really room for collaboration in those spaces.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to walk ahead because I think we've got a question. If we can just ask you to introduce yourself as well, that would be great.
Thank you. My name is Adnan. I'm Senior Legal Advisor at Seed Foundation. It's a local NGO in Iraq, Kurdistan region. I have one question regarding, so before that, I want to thank all the panelists for their valuable insights and thoughts. I want to talk about accountability and how we can promote accountability. Like these perpetrators, for example, on these platforms, for example, they are not conducting or committing one crime and leave. They will be posting or using the content maybe for someone else, later for someone else. So is there anything that those companies do with regard to holding them accountable? And the second question will be, I know that there is always a line when we talk about collaboration with courts and the judicial authorities, handing over like evidence and materials that have been removed, because that will help accessing justice for those women. A lot of time when women seek assistance, some of them seek stopping the content or removing the content, but others, they want justice and they want the perpetrators to be accountable. Thank you.
That's a great question. Thank you very much. Panel? Niels, I think we've got a question.
We've got an online question. Carissa is asking, do existing legal frameworks hold any weight in preventing NCII, both real and AI generated, such as ICCPR, Article 17 for privacy?
Okay, and one more question we'll field.
Hi, I'm a researcher based in Germany, and I have a question to the representative from Meta. I'm actually reporting hate speeches, and sexually abusive content on a weekly basis, and I do it not just for work but also on a personal level. The problem is that there are three possibilities. Only one request of mine was accepted by Meta. The second situation is that there was no response at all, and there was no way for me to challenge or to continue my request or to send any follow-up requests. And the third possibility was that there was no, acceptance of my request. So in the case of wanting to follow up with my own request or challenging your Meta decision, what would you suggest me to do? And I also want to ask, what is Meta take on punishing the perpetrators of those images? Because I know that so far the highest punishment is to deactivate or to delete the account. And my question to the woman in charge of a helpline, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. In your experiences, were there any women or gender diverse people who complain about sexual abuses? Because actually I'm also doing research on online gender-based violence, and in my own research there are a lot of teenagers or gender diverse people who actually face the issues, and also how would you reach out to the people who don't really understand the issues and who don't really have any hope of addressing their issues? Thank you.
Okay. I think there's a lot of commonality between the two questions, and perhaps there's one specifically for Meta, and given as well the oversight board, there's a relevant point. So the question about particularly to do with prosecution, the first question, anyone wish to respond?
I can respond from Meta's perspective. So we work with law enforcement agencies across the globe, and in terms of when we get valid legal requests, we will respond with the data that is required to prosecute, which is which is the job of the prosecutors. We also disclose in transparency reports that we publish in terms of the number of data requests that we've received from authorities and how many data requests that we've complied with. We also have teams who work in Meta who are working directly with law enforcement authorities to ensure for the crimes, and I'm not just talking about NCII here, for the really high severity crimes that we have someone in case they need a a point of contact. What I will say is there is less visibility that we have in terms of the actual prosecutions. So, for example, where we have the issue of child sexual abuse material, we are required to report as a US organization to NCMIC. NCMIC then works with law enforcement authorities in terms of making sure that really sensitive data is available in a very privacy protective manner, which is available to law enforcement authorities. We don't really have visibility on how that data is being used to prosecute prosecute the perpetrators, and I think that's an important link of the chain that is missing. And I think when one of the things that we talk about it's a whole chain, and somebody asked, what do you do in addition to deplatforming? I think that all stakeholders have a role, and we can remove the content and we can deplatform, and we can work with law enforcement agencies to respond to valid requests. But I think that there needs to be a lot more transparency in terms of the prosecutions. Like, we know that in a lot of countries, a lot of these crimes may be reported but not necessarily are prosecuted in the for a number of reasons, including lack of capacity, lack of understanding, lack of resources, or just the inability to prosecute.
Yeah, responding to the researcher, so not only as a helpline, as sitting at the oversight board, we actually investigated a bundle case of deepfake images, one from India and one from US. And we actually recommended so many things to Meta around the gaps that we saw. But one thing that was clear to us was that Meta platforms need to create pathways for users to easily report this type of content, and they must act quickly as well. And it shouldn't matter whether the victim is a celebrity or a regular person. What we noticed that in the cases that we picked up were of the celebrity. They were public people, like public persons. But then when their content went viral, that's where we took up the case. But what exactly is the mechanism at Meta in terms of giving importance to every user's report is a matter of concern. I would also say that what we do as a helpline, we raise awareness a lot in different institutions, schools, colleges, try to work with the government, although it's not their priority, but just to let people know that this kind of crime exists, but there are also remedies and who they can reach out to. And I think you raised a point around repeated offenders. And I think that's also a point of concern for us, that when people who are repeated offenders, they find a way to come back to platform and then do the same thing. And I think this is like a really question to the platform, that what they do with the repeated offenders.
Thank you, Nagat. Just so also to do with Carissa's question, I think too, Sophie, I think this one, I anticipate you may have a response to as well, in terms of Niels. I think the question was around existing legal frameworks hold any weight in preventing NCII. I suspect you have a response to that one.
Thanks, David. I'll try not to take too long. But quickly, first on the evidence point, I think, unfortunately, even in the UK, where we've had legislation around the sharing of non-consensual intimate images for almost 10 years now, the collection of evidence still represents challenges, and there is no consistent approach. Even we have 43 police forces in the UK, so consistency is always a challenge, but certainly there's nothing really around evidence. But we have, as a helpline, provided statements to the police. We can just establish what we have done, facts, dates, the links that we have removed. And I also think there's a bit of work around categorization of intimate images, because I think sometimes this content, and it's very off-putting for victims, is shared amongst multiple police officers, with the prosecuting services and in courts. And that's a massive barrier, I think, to people coming forward. And I think that we could do some work around supplying information in categories that should be accepted by courts, so that all those individuals don't have to view content. And I think that would be quite a supportive measure to get people coming forward and supporting prosecutions. But in terms of legal frameworks, as I said, it's nearly 10 years since the UK first got legislation in this area. And in fairness to them, it wasn't great legislation to start with, but they responded fairly quickly, government, in that they recognised within sort of six-ish years that the legislation wasn't fit for purpose, and a really thorough review was done, and we got new legislation at the beginning of this year, which is much more comprehensive and focuses on the consent of the person that is depicted in an image, rather than the intentions or motivations of perpetrators. And that's quite a powerful step forward, because this intention to cause distress is still quite current in other forms of legislation around the world. But there is definitely more to do in terms of the status of legal content. We are campaigning in the UK for non-consensual intimate images, particularly after conviction, to be classified as illegal content and to be treated in the same way as child sexual abuse material, to give us the same powers to remove. We are already good at removal. We have great relationships with industry, but where we can't, because there are multiple non-compliant sites whose business model is based on the sharing of this sort of content, and they don't comply with us, and they don't comply with other regulators, and they are hosted in countries beyond the reach of regulation. So I think it's really important that we find other ways of leveraging the law to make this content much less visible, to give people the security that they can actually move on with their lives and not be in fear that their images are 2-3 clicks away from being viewed by anyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophie. And I want to give a shout out too, as well, to the draft UN Cybercrime Convention that was published in August, and particularly I think UNODC's global strategy in terms of the inclusion of NCII. It was much to our surprise, but the inclusion of NCII within the new cybercrime, or at least the draft cybercrime convention, which we're anticipating will be ratified next year, that all states should have laws to do with NCII. So perhaps in response to that question, will we have some today? There are some. To what weight? We've heard from Sophie, there's some degree, but they can prove quite porous. But then optimism around, a push, a direction across the world in terms of laws that will help in this regard. I'm conscious we've only got a couple of minutes left. You wanted to make a comment, quick comment, Boris?
I'll try. Thank you for the questions, and as well, far from me to say, coming from an NGO and working in this space from an NGO perspective, all of the three questions come back to the same thing in my mind. And we talked about accountability, legal frameworks, and then reporting. It does come back to the middle letter of this conference, and that is the Internet Governance Forum. I don't think the scary question is, what are you going to do, Meta, TikTok, Reddit? I think the scary question is, what are we going to do? And how are we going to define accountability for perpetrators on those platforms, develop the legal frameworks and the governance to make sure that the platforms do follow that, and then have accountability on their end. I think that's a difficult question for us to define, and absolutely the legal frameworks, I would say, need to be more inspired around the world, more forward looking, so we as a society in all cultures and different nation states defined how do we approach accountability of abuse in a digital space, and how do we hold those accountable to rights. And I think it's a far more diverse question that we need to discuss as a society than one stakeholder can answer. But I'm here for it. And if anybody has a good idea or an inspiring legal framework around the world, please do share it.
Which will probably have to be the closing remark, given we've run out of time. Look, the transcribes stopped. Hopefully we've given you some form of response here, and also the panel, we've already said, so world leading panel in terms of insight. So I pay tribute to all of your work, and I would invite everyone to just show our recognition for both the extraordinary work that these people do, together with the panel session as well. So thank you very much.